All right. Thanks, everyone, and good morning or good afternoon to Leah and any of our other East Coast folks that might be joining us today. Really excited for this second session of our Connecting the Dots series. And today we are focusing on data management, data collection, how you get started, how you work with partners, and really diving deep into some of the logistics. And we have an awesome lineup of speakers that I am really excited to hear from, and I hope you are all too. Western Landowners Alliance is, as many of you know, founded and led by Landowners in the West organization. We work to advance policies and practices that sustain working lands, connected landscapes, and native species. We do this through a broad network of landowner partners and other partners. And we work to do this in three main ways: by providing landowners a seat at the policy table, by facilitating peer-to-peer knowledge exchange, and by sharing the story of working land stewardship broadly. So this series is part of that effort, and I'm going to turn it back over to Eva to moderate today. Thanks, Eva.
Great. Great. So we really want this to be an engaging and participatory event, but we do have fantastic speakers. So we're really excited to work with Western Landowners. They, it's always better when we work in partnership, and their focus really buttresses nicely with that of the Career Coalition. Our mission is to build resilience on working landscapes, and we're an education and outreach organization primarily. And so we're really focused on bringing together sort of peer-to-peer learning and sharing, as well as actual work on the land. We operate in the Radical Center, where we want lots of different people engaging in ideas, and they might not always agree with each other. And we find that that can be more fruitful than if we all just nod along with things we agree with. So hopefully you'll find something that sparks your interest or that doesn't quite align with what you've been doing in the past, and use that as a learning opportunity. And so I want to stop talking, but that's who Kavira is. Thank you again to Western Landowners. And from now, I think we're going to move right in to starting off. And so I often get the question of, well, I'm interested in knowing what's going on with my land, but how do I start? And so, there's some of the simple ways of you take a photo one year and then you go back to the same spot and take a photo the next year. That's fantastic. And then everything beyond that, you can layer on sort of delicious layers of information to capture. And there are a lot of people out in the world who are there to help, including someone like Leah. Leah is an agricultural research coordinator at Wolf's Neck Center, and she coordinates the on-farm research trials. And then she translates that research into what's sort of sensible to everyone else. And she's been working with Open Team, that's technology for agricultural management, to test out open source technology tools that can help understand agricultural data and health, both for yourself and to share out if you're willing to. So take it away, Leah.
Thanks. I'm going to share my other screen, so bear with me for just a sec. Share this one. And let's see. Here we go. All right. Well, thanks, Eva, and thanks for having me here today. As Eva mentioned, I'm Leah. I'm the Ag Research Coordinator at Wolf's Neck Center and with Open Team, which is a project of Wolf's Neck Center. And we'll get into all of that. And so today I'll mostly be talking about the Open Team Ag Tech ecosystem and then some specific projects that we're working on. So let us get started. But before we get into that, I just wanted to talk a little bit about Wolf's Neck Center. So we're a nonprofit organic dairy and vegetable farm. We have the dairy and a vegetable farm and an educational center, a research center, a campground. So this makes our farm quite a bustling tourist destination, as well as a functional farm. Our management practices reflect these multi-layered goals of the operation. And over the last 2 years, we've really been building up our research project portfolio and investing in equipment to conduct research on agricultural practices that can hold up in the face of unpredictable weather patterns and climate change. We're using our unique ecosystem at Wolf's Neck, having the ocean and some fresh water around us as well, and our farming operations as a living laboratory to conduct research trials and test out new emerging technologies. And so one of our largest research projects that we've been building up is called Open Team, and that stands for Open Technology Ecosystem for Agricultural Management. It's a project funded by the Foundation for Food and Agricultural Research. It's a 5-year project, and currently we're in year 3. So who we are, that's important. So we're a community of tech developers, farmers, ranchers, technical service providers, and researchers from all over the country, and we're working together to advance soil health and mitigate climate change from the ground up. More than 45 partner organizations and 200 individuals have joined our initiative. The Open Team community enables an exchange of agricultural knowledge, information, and inspiration at scale, driven by farmer trust and local innovation. The Open Team suite of tools is currently being implemented in farmer networks across the country that's collecting data on soils and management practices that will eventually assist farmers to make more informed decisions and learn from each other and collaborate. So here's just showing you a bunch of our different partners, some of which are those tech developers, corporations, and farms. And Quivira is one of them. So thanks, Quivira Coalition. So what we do. We're creating a tech ecosystem and social community to support data interoperability for better soil health insights for farmers, ranchers, researchers, food companies, and other stakeholders. And so you're probably wondering, why? Why are we doing this? And so we're trying to solve a problem. And right now there are many different ag tech and ag softwares out there, but none of them connect. So the goal of Open Team is to really create this ecosystem of tech tools for farmers in which data can flow through the entire ecosystem, making it so farmers only have to enter in data once and can use that data in multiple ways. But I used a lot of language in there that can be confusing, so I just want to go over some of that a little bit with everybody. So one of those things is, what is a tech ecosystem? So a technology ecosystem is a complex network or interconnected system. So just as a natural ecosystem is a community of organisms that are linked through nutrient flows, a technology ecosystem is a community of tools and technologies that are linked through data flows. What is open source and why is that important? Open source is a publicly accessible software design that can be modified and shared by multiple users. And because open source utilizes multiple collaborators, it allows for more control, increased security, and stability, and also allows for more training opportunities for new developers to come in and contribute. And then lastly, what is data interoperability? And interoperability allows data to flow from one software to another on the back end without having to re-enter data into a platform. So imagine you're collecting data for your organic certification, a research project, and for an NRCS cost share program. Our goal would be for you to be able to enter that data in once, and through a series of permissions that you can turn on and off, you can choose to share that data to all of your various audiences and stakeholders, making it easier for the farmer and putting less of a burden on that data flow. So through this network of technology providers, farms, ranchers, universities, and food networks, we're working towards the shared technology commons for data intake and data management, making access to tech and agricultural data more accessible to growers. Open Team assists growers to get onboarded and set up with the tools. The individual farmer or rancher has complete control and ownership over their data. And through the process of farmer and rancher permissions, data can be shared with other tech tools in the ecosystem, depending on individual goals. And so for today, I'm going to focus on one of the many Open Team work streams, really looking at on-farm research and monitoring and how we're helping through all of that. So our field methods working group is one of our many working groups within Open Team, and it really bridges the science with the available tech tools to create an approach that supports the needs of farmers and ranchers. We've been working on a research question and protocol library and decision tool to help farmers and ranchers choose in-field soil health assessments that fit their needs for research or monitoring and management as well, but mostly focused on sort of those monitoring questions. So the goals of this research decision tool and protocol library are to create a robust decision tree to assist farmer researchers, environmental markets, choose soil assessment protocols for their needs, to help standardize sampling and data collection across multiple farms, to use data to answer key research questions, and to maximize accuracy and precision while minimizing sampling costs. And as of right now, we've assessed different protocols for water infiltration rate, bulk density, aggregate stability, and we're currently working through carbon protocols. So I'm going to show you a little bit about what we've come up with so far. So what we're calling them is our field method recipe cards. We sort of use this recipe food analogy through our work. And so this is an analog version of a decision support tool that will eventually get coded into one of our tech tools. And so we sent out all of these cards to our community in the fall to get feedback before coding it into the actual software, just so we can get an understanding of if this is giving farmers, ranchers, researchers the information that they would actually need. And so this first little page gives a brief overview of each of the metrics that we've been working on, what they measure, why they are important. And so for the purpose of today, I'm just going to pick water infiltration, and we'll sort of go through some of these cards so I can show you what's on here. Okay. So each of the cards has a category here, like equipment cost, complexity, demonstration value, monitoring value, etc., and with symbols that represent a rating. And so through a series of meetings with various stakeholders, we found that these following categories were the most important when making the decision about which protocols to use in the field. And so we also added some notes on the bottom of factors that needed to be kept constant and other considerations when using the protocol. And on the back of each of the cards, you'll see there's actually the protocol here, and on some of the longer protocols, it'll have a QR code that you can put on your phone, and then the protocol comes up there. And then let's see what's next here. And then here's just another example. And so it explains what it measures, the cost of it, how complex it is, the demonstration value, the monitoring value. And what I usually use as an example is Wolf's Neck, where we have, we're a public farm. A lot of the stuff that we do on site is for demonstration. We have classes, we have summer camps. And so most of the protocols that we're going to want to use in the field are ones that have high demonstration value. Like we want to show what runoff looks like. We'll dump a 5-gallon bucket of water on the ground so we can show how water flows across your surface. However, we're also part of pretty intense research projects as well. And so for those ones, we'll want something with the demonstration value doesn't matter as much, but we'll want something that has a high monitoring value where we want to really assess change over time with an implemented management plan or something like that. And this is just an example of one of those QR code ones. Tells you the equipment that you need beforehand so that when you get out in the field, you're sort of ready to go. And then at the end of each section, we have a summary card so that the user can compare the different protocols to give a sense of the least and most expensive, the least and most complex, the least and most accurate and precise, and etc. So currently we're working with members of our SI. They create a tool called Survey Stack, which is essentially a form builder similar to like Google Forms, but it's all open source, and you can collect data that can be stored to share later on. And so we're using their Survey Stack platform to enter in protocols and create the decision support tool there. So how this would work is that the user will sign into their Survey Stack account and answer a series of questions that would get at all of these things: how much money they can spend on monitoring, how much help they have, how long will they have to do it, what are their research and monitoring goals. And based on how they answer those questions, it'll guide them to the recommended protocols, rating them from this will fit your needs the most to this doesn't seem like it'll fit your needs. And then from there, they can actually walk through the protocol and collect that data in the field. And so part of the purpose of this network of sharing research questions and methodologies and protocols can help producers and technical service providers both choose research protocols and allow for standardized data collection across different farms. And this can really allow us to start answering big research questions using large aggregated data sets. So as part of our open team community, our hubs, which are our farms that we work with, are engaged in various pilot programs to test out and provide feedback on the emerging open source softwares. So one group, and so I'm going to focus on a few of those today. These are some of them that you see here, some of the tech tools and some of the groups that we work with. But one group is committed to using open team tech tools is PASA, which is a Pennsylvania Sustainable Ag Association. And this group has a soil health benchmarking study that has cohorts in Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Maine. So there are over 200 farmers participating in this study, and farmers work with the cohort project leaders to collect management data on their farms throughout the season and soil samples from 3 of their fields. And they continue to do this for years. They started about 5 years ago, and we just keep adding more farms to it. And so all of this data is entered into SurveyStack, that platform I mentioned earlier, and through a series of survey questions. And that ensures that all of the data is entered in the same way and is stored in the same format. And from here, PASA takes the data from the surveys and combines it with the soil data to generate reports for each of the farms. Then the farms can benchmark their soil health against themselves year after year. And they're also able to benchmark their soils against other farms with similar production types and soil types, because we know that the data is being collected in the same way, stored in the same way. We're all calling apples, apples, et cetera. And so through this, we're really starting to create a soils database for the Northeast, which we're really excited about. Another one of these pilots that I wanted to highlight is the Northeast Dairy Grazing Group. And this is a group of Stonyfield dairy producers who are committed to soil health and willing to test out some of our new tools, which if some of you have tried out new tools, it can be a little bit of a pain sometimes. So we're really thankful for all of them. And so we have 10 farms who participated in the group this past year. Each farm tracked their daily animal moves and biomass in each pasture pre and post grazing using Pasture Map, which is a platform that you all might be used to. It's just record keeping for pasture-based systems. And so we also collected soil samples on all 10 of these farms using a software called SoilStack. The same collection protocols were used, and they were all sent to the same labs. And so SoilStack is created by that open source platform, SurveyStack, that I mentioned. And it's a tool that assists with sampling location. And so how it works is it uses a stratified random sampling approach, looking at aspect, slope, elevation, soil type, and measure of greenness to choose sampling points to ensure that the user will get a representative sampling of their field, farm, or ranch. So we use that program to choose all of our sampling points across the 10 farms. And on 3 of those 10 farms, we took additional samples using our size soil carbon reflectometer, which is what you see here. And so let's talk about that a little bit. So as many of you know, measuring soil organic carbon can be very expensive, time consuming, and complicated, which makes it pretty difficult for farmers to soil sample during their busy schedules and to be able to spend the money to do so. And so what SoilStack is trying to do through the reflectometer is allow farmers to take a soil sample and measure the SOC content on the spot. And this is one of the more accurate and least time-consuming measurement options that exist at the moment. Right now, we're in calibration phase, so it'll probably be a few years, a few more seasons until it's really ready to go. And so prior to the sampling, SoilStack determined where the sampling points would be using that stratified random sampling. And then you go into the field, collect your your soil from the fields, you send a piece of it off to a lab, and we actually ended up sending it off to 2 labs, and then save a little bit of it, dry it, and then take a scan using this reflectometer, and then it gives you back a spectral value that then gets sent to our site, and they convert it into what your organic carbon level would be. So right now they're in calibration mode, as I mentioned, but we're doing this. There's several farms participating throughout the United States to get calibrations for different regions and soil types. And so this is one of the ways that we're hoping to get tools in the hands of farmers that can be more accessible so that they can get real valuable information right on their fields for pretty cheap. And so, these pilot programs have been instrumental to the success of Open Team to ensure that the tools in the ecosystem are really meeting the needs of farmers and ranchers of all scales, regions, and production types. And through this shared open source ag tech toolkit, we really aim to provide farmers and ranchers with the tools that they need to answer questions about the impacts of their management practices on the land and to help with future decision making. So that's all I have for today. And I thank you all for tuning in, and I look forward to hearing your questions after our other speakers. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Leah. You want to stop screen sharing, or maybe I can impose that on you? There we go. I can also. That's great. It's so cool to hear what Open Team is progressing through. I've sort of had a toe in it for a long time, and it's just amazing when you tune in the sort of leaps and bounds. I think there's a lot of people interested in soil carbon right now, and so thanks for doing all of that work. And then, yeah, thanks for walking through the jargon words of interoperability and platform. I think it's really new, and so having an introduction is really great. So thanks again. All right, so next up, and like I said, feel free to drop questions in the chat. Next up, we have Bill Milton. He has been ranching in Montana since 1956 and has a particular interest in figuring out how ranchers and local communities can monitor the health of the working landscapes and the communities themselves. I think that's a really important part, is that there's more to just monitoring than just the soil. And then he's been facilitating a broad group of partners called the Rangeland Monitoring Group that's dedicated to finding an effective means to achieve this objective. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Bill. Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation. And Leah, wow, that kind of blew me away. I think the project that we'll be sharing here, and Peter Donovan from Soil Carbon Coalition, who's helping us with this project, is going to do a little guest appearance on how he's helping us out. But I think we'll find in my presentation that we're trying to accomplish the same things that you just picked up in the last presentation, but it might appear to be a little more coarse than the progress they're making. It's really exciting to see the tools they're using there. But I think to begin here, I need to provide a little context of why I, as a rancher out here in eastern Montana, operating both on private and public land, got into monitoring pretty early in the game, like back in the late 80s, and how my investment with others led to imagining the Rangeland Monitoring Group and where we are with that project at this point in time. So the context I'll briefly share is that my father bought a ranch in Montana in the mid-50s, and he died fairly early, but I spent most of my formative years on that ranch, large ranch, near between Great Falls and Helena in Montana, and really kind of created this relationship I had to the land and wildlife and to cows. And I left that ranch when, we had to sell it, and we actually sold it to, we ended up doing a deal with the Fish, Wildlife and Parks, which the only reason I bring this up is that decision that that me and my siblings make when we were quite young led to a whole, well, basically a commitment to collaboration, dealing with all sorts of problems in the West. And I'll come back to that in a little bit. But as I left and worked myself around, I met and married my wife, Dana, and we took some of the inheritance I got from my father's place and eventually bought a ranch in Muscle County. And a few years into that, I was trying to figure out some different ways about how to approach our grazing practices. And a friend of ours, the Charters, we went down to a savory school in Albuquerque in '85, and that kind of blew me away. It just totally blew up some of my paradigms about how we can approach the use of livestock on range. And so I came back, and being that our ranch was about 40% public land, I had to figure out a way to get the public, get BLM to buy into doing a radically different approach to managing cattle on a landscape that involved both private and public land. Fortunately, there was someone in the office here in Billings who was willing to to experiment with us. I think a lot of his seniors in the office there probably thought he was a bit crazy to think about doing, kind of like what you're seeing in this picture here, running 400 or 500 cattle and moving them often in high stock density at that time, and even now, it's not entirely a practice that everybody thinks is maybe the most appropriate practice. It took us about 3 years working with BLM with great help from NRCS. We got kind of a grant program from them to develop water systems and fencing. And at the end of after 3 years, the BLM agreed to do something really quite different on a permittee. And so one of the conditions for doing this is that we had to have a third-party monitoring person and a protocol that could document over time whether we were really messing up the landscape with this crazy approach or whether we were actually, making the situation more healthy. And so we were, I wouldn't say forced into it, because, I had a natural curiosity for plants and wildlife, and often maybe more than I did even for managing cattle. So I was intrigued by the idea of monitoring, but it also was something that we had no choice in terms of whether to do it or not, because it was required in order to be able to experiment with moving livestock over landscape and in quite a different way, that we had to document that we weren't messing up. So if we go to the next slide, Catherine, if you can handle that. I'm gonna try and move this forward. So this just gives a kind of a quick look at our ranch. It's about 15,000 acres. These colors reflect different units. There's 5 major units of almost 5 sections each. This plan has evolved over the last 30, 40 years and continues to change. But these fences, what might look like, oh God, you're really dividing up the landscape and it must look really crowded. But because these are all one-wire electric fences, unless you're really looking closely, you hardly see them. If you were on the top of a hill on the ranch somewhere and looking over, you would have to look really closely to see where these fences actually are. And when we move cattle through this, we use a lot of temporary fence. So each one of these paddocks, we might move cattle anywhere from 2 to 10 times in each one of those paddocks using temporary fence. So as we developed our monitoring, and I'm going to kind of get into the next slides, we started experimenting with how we could take the data that had been collected through basically the person we contracted with is Roland Cruz, a longtime holistic management practitioner. And he developed a monitoring protocol on the ground. And then more recently, we've been working with the Rangeland analysis program, which uses remote sensing to capture some of the same kind of indicators, but maybe in a little more coarse way, but nevertheless providing a context over a much larger landscape. So this particular slide is, and this kind of ties back to some technology we use, which is the Maya program, which I think is the sponsor of one of the sponsors of this. So it's a program that allows us to archive our moves and to actually project how many animal days we may have, a year and a year down the road based on the kind of rainfall we're getting. So they're actually correlating here in this slide rainfall with potential forage production in terms of how we manage on good or more difficult years like the last two. So what's interesting about this slide is that you'll notice that the average ADAs are actually going up while rainfall is actually decreasing. And if you look at the slide from 2016 to 2020-21, even with pressure from Roland that, we were never running at the level of stock density that he thought would really start making a difference, we finally started kicking into gear in 2016, even after doing this since like the early 90s. And so we started actually increasing our animal days per acre, but the way we were moving our cattle, we, and you'll see it in some other slides, we actually were creating more biomass even with sometimes less rainfall. Now that isn't something that's going to happen forever. If you just don't get any rain, things don't just keep improving. So let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, this slide is using the range analysis program. And for those of you who may not be familiar, this was developed up here in Montana in Missoula with the NRCS, in which they've been getting more skilled in using remote sensing, going back at looking at satellite imagery back in the mid 80s, and being able to actually look at things like bare ground or annuals, but capturing and even perennials and annuals and the level of bare ground that's occurring over large landscapes. So while it can be a little bit coarse and it's not a tool you would entirely want to rely on, it's a really important tool to get a sense on a larger landscape level. Are we moving toward less bare ground or more bare ground? Are we getting some upticks in annuals? Or is there so let me just, if we just look at, if you look at that top slide, you'll see as you're going across on that green line, there's the whole dip right there in the late 90s and 2000. Well, that was about an 8-year drought in our part of the world. And so despite all our best efforts, you could see one, that we were getting less production, and that sort of tan brown line is our bare ground, and that started to go up. Since then, it's been on a decline, though in the last couple of years, under drought conditions, despite our best efforts, we're starting to see a little uptick in bare ground. If you, on that right side too, if you see that, if you're looking at annual forbs and grass cover, that kind of really dark reddish brown line, there's just a really quick jump and then a quick drop. And what happened there is back in 2018, we just had this explosion of Japanese brome, a winter annual. It's related to cheatgrass, but different, a little more palatable than cheatgrass, but it just exploded. And everybody was kind of freaking out that, this native landscape is going to be overcome by annuals, but the natives were there. The conditions were just perfect for the seed that just was inherent, just is in the ground there, for it to really express itself. And so, the green line, showing perennial forbs and grass, took a dip because of that competition, but then the next year and the year following, it started to go back up again. So this kind of a slide is really important. If you and other ranchers in a community are looking at this, these are really wonderful data for us to say, why did that happen? And to be able to capture it in time over history that this was happening. Maybe go to the next slide, please. So yeah, this is a slide from Roland Cruz, our consultant we work with. And this just shows the change of perennial perennial plants over time. And of course, our goal is to increase both diversity and amount of perennial species versus annuals over time. And again, it's not a perfect line, despite all our best efforts in our grazing management. But it does show that there, is sort of generally been an increase over time. And you see again back on the sort of the middle to the left, you see that sharp drop that occurred during that long drought period in the late 90s and early 2000s. And back then there was actually places where I remember near the end of that, we were almost fully destocked. The plants just started dying. And I remember a lot of people in Montana were wondering if the grass would come back. And yeah, it did. These places are quite resilient, came back in a good way. So let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, this is another thing that you can pick up from the Rangeland Analysis Program, that it actually measures biomass, in pounds of forage on the landscape over time. And again, this slide shows that the ranch over the last, since the mid 80s has been generally creating more biomass over time with, the dips that come with changes in precipitation. And there again, on the right, you'll see this dramatic kind of flip when we had that production of Japanese brome. So maybe go to the next slide, please. So now we're coming back. So there's RAP. And then we come back to rolling again. So what we're trying to do is show this relationship, that it's really important to have ground monitoring, but to take advantage of remote sensing. Because if there's a relationship between the two and a good grounding between the two, then we get confidence that we can use both these tools together to see what our management decisions are actually creating on the ground. And what's interesting here that actually was a little bit concerning, if you look at perennial plant basal cover, while, our average soil surface cover is getting to a point where we're up to, almost 90% covered out here in a fairly dry habitat. We've had a little bit of a downturn in basal cover, which is actually the amount of leaves that are exposed that can capture photosynthesis. And the recent few years of that downturn, both is sort of a cause and effect relationship between the annuals, and also we had one year we had a huge growth of sweet clover that was so competitive that it actually in some places killed sagebrush. I mean, it just literally dominated the growing season, and so a lot of the perennial cover just didn't express itself. So again, the point I'm trying to convey here is, when a rancher could do this, or a group of ranchers can do this, and this will get into our discussion on the Rangeland Monitoring Group, we can use this data to not in itself sort of define the next action, but we can share that with our fellow ranchers and with NGOs and academics and scientists and try to draw conclusions on what would be the best response, because I often tell people over the 40 plus years I've been ranching out in this part of the world, I don't think we've done the same thing twice. So please, the next slide. This is another historical plot that actually our apprentice, Natalie Berkman, who's our apprentice for the last 2 years, which probably this wouldn't have happened without her. It's great to have these young people who understand all this stuff, and she was just such a wonderful person now working on a great place on the western part of the state. And we hope to get our new apprentice, thank you, Quivira Coalition, coming on here in a couple of weeks. But anyway, what this shows is that our biomass continues to be fairly much on an upward trend. And even during this last drought year, maybe hard to see, but that middle line in terms of percent, even this year, which we only got 7 inches of rain, we were still above 100% of what would be projected for the habitat type. So next slide. So actually, no, we're going to go back. I want to bring. This is a good time to bring Peter in, who is put together Soil Carbon Coalition, has done some soil samples, and I want him to share briefly how he's been using his approach and how to measure soil and just capture the context of just how we work together. So Peter, it's yours for a few minutes.
Well, thanks, Bill. Can people hear me?
I can.
Yeah. Okay. Catherine is running the slides here. So let's start with this. This is soilhealth.app. And what we're looking at is the project. This is an app not for individuals, but for groups of people to learn and share. Its design is primarily learning more than judgment, but judgments can be made. Let's go to observations, Catherine. Okay, these are geolocated observations. And in the search box, why don't you go ahead and type in carbon and then update the map. And then scroll down a little bit to Milton Ranch, which is, I think, the 33. There we go. Anyway, these are the geolocated observations that contain the word carbon. And go ahead and click on one or two of those or something, and we'll open up. Yeah, that'll open in another window. Go ahead and click it. And you see an example. This is from the Western Sustainability Exchange sampling. And you can see, all the numerical data that they supplied, and as well as it's a geolocated thing. The idea here is to make available for sharing and discussion some fairly detailed observations that have context of place. It's not just one or two numbers, but you see how you have some insight of how the sampling was done, some of the parameters around it. And let's go to back to the original tab, Catherine, and you can just switch tabs up on your browser tab. Yeah. And let's go to the top again. And then go to the search box. Let's X out carbon and do infiltration. And then update the map. And likewise, let's go to one of Bill's. And there's 27 observations. I think that's where Bill is. And let's look at the group of two right there. The left, there you go. Let's look at one of those observations. Again, this was made with multiple infiltration rings when I was there this summer, and we can scroll down and see the actual data, 1-inch timings in a 6-inch ring. And these turned out to be faster than the one across the road. Anyway, but you get the idea of how we're able to collect detailed data with context. And this, I believe, is aligned with the RMG goal of being a participatory sharing group where people can learn from each other, as well as show themselves fairly well to the outside world. And let's go to posts now. There we go. And let's scroll down just a little bit. Let's visit best possible outcomes of the Rangeland monitoring group. For example, this is a public post. Anybody can see it. And this is a collective statement about best possible outcomes for this group. And as you can see, learning is a primary one, but there's also the capacity for judgment. And then finally, let's go to, we have posts, we have observations, we also have custom maps. Let's go to custom maps or maps. And let's look at the Milton Ranch. In other words, this is a multi-layered custom map of Bill's Ranch, and you can uncheck and check various categories on the menu there. And some of these observations are literally on top of each other. So, but they're also clickable. It's an interactive map, but you can see the detail and the density of observations here on Bill's place. We don't have them summarized in a table or anything, but this is all explorable by people who are part of this group. A lot of these observations are private. You won't be able to see them unless you're part of this group, and that's something we're sort of working on. What's the balance between public and private observations here? And this is all backed up with an API that's an application programming interface that's very flexible and shareable with other websites or anything like that. And it's also, we can bring in data from other websites. Let's look at the about on the Milton Ranch. Yeah, if you're not logged in, and then let's try the data tab as well. There might be a little bit of information about that. Here's an example graph from the Open ET tool, the Open Evapotranspiration tool, which is, I believe, probably a bit more accurate in terms of productivity than the Rangelands analysis platform, but that's just kind of a personal opinion. But this also gives a long overview back to 2016 of basically production, especially in a dryland situation, and using two different models here. I recommend OpenET for the Western United States. It's a good tool. Anyway, let's end up with going to the home screen on soilhealth.app, right up the top there, where it's a little house there, yeah, right there. And let's scroll down to the basic direction here is participatory community science, rather than just surveillance, compliance, certification, or research. Those are all available, but there may be better tools for that. But this tool is particularly designed, and I'm happy to be working with RMG Group on this because they have a definite interest in that shared intelligence, and it's a flexible thing, and it's been great to work with that group of ranchers. I've done a lot of carbon monitoring over the years, and what we need in monitoring, as well as in our application of the soil health principles, is context. And monitoring data can help form and bolster relationships as well. And it can't all be digital. Not everybody is a digital freak or nerd. So the face-to-face interpretations and getting together on the land are very important for these projects. Anyway, that's about all I have, unless you have other questions, Bill.
No, we'll run through the rest of my slides. Could someone share how much time I have so I can kind of monitor how to do the last few slides?
We've got 3 to 5 minutes.
Okay, well, so let's go to the next slide that had the. So the reason I put this on is so how you can sometimes pick an indicator that probably isn't a useful indicator. So at some point, the RMG group will not only be looking at land health indicators, but we'll be looking at production indicators as well, because I say this facetiously, anyone can maybe take 1,000 yearlings and work them across the landscape in a way that'll be useful for land with good time control and stock density, but that necessarily won't lead to something that is economically sustainable. So at some point in this process, we need to look at the whole picture as like, yeah, you're doing a great job on the ground, but how are you doing with your economic enterprise? So next slide, please. Okay, I just wanted to mention this bird monitoring bit. So, that the key indicators we started with is one, looking at soil, looking at plants, looking at birds. We have a really interesting program up here dealing with 4 birds that are of critical concern in the Northern Plains. And so we're working with a number of ranchers who are actually agreeing to do monitoring. We haven't been doing this that long. But the point I'm making is that we're not just focused on, we need to be looking at all the different sort of sentient beings that rely on these grasslands. And this is a really important project, and also creates a lot of interest from NGO partners we work with, like Rural Wildlife Fund in Audubon, and the Nature Conservancy. So next slide, please. Okay, this is just a quick hit on my sort of philosophy, maybe not my philosophy, but this top quote is one that came out of this brainstorming that Peter referenced in terms of best outcomes. The idea, what is pastoral going to be relevant? I feel so committed to this practice of a community approach, because that is a scale in which family ranchers and tribes and all the people who are working out in these landscapes can tell a story that's rich enough and large enough and credible enough that people can appreciate the importance of the people who are out here working and living in these places. That is, you're just not looking at my place. I mean, I've decided that just looking at my place is not nearly sufficient. We live in these watersheds, we live in landscapes, wildlife, weeds, water, a variety of things don't stop at our border fences. So this practice of working together and understanding what we're doing in our grazing management and how we're trying to improve every aspect of our business and our relationships goes, hand in glove with the idea of doing land monitoring itself. Next slide, please. So yeah, you've already, got a good hit from Peter on where we're going with the Rangeland Monitoring Group. It's amazing. We've been hammering at this for almost 6 years, and recently got a SARE grant to actually hire a little help. We've been just, doing this all voluntarily, to where, how do we create a platform that can store the data like we've been sharing with you today? How can we make that platform easily accessible to all the ranchers involved? How do we create a trusted, transparent process so that there really is a lot of shared intelligence and leveraging? I often look at this as sort of the flywheel effect that, as we get this data and we get better at talking to each other about understanding this data, the flywheel starts moving, and at some point, for the way flywheels work, it just gets a certain momentum and it sort of feeds itself. And so if we can get to this point in these rural communities where the information flow is just feeding itself and the feedback loop is just immediate, all of us can be making more rapid decisions to do, to create better performance either on the ground or in our businesses or just how we work with each other. So then the last slide, please. So this is a project, I just kind of threw this in this morning because of some updates that came from this. And I'm going to include, I need to get some links here. So this is a project that we're working with a video geographer, Laura Tomoff, who where we're taking 4 regions in Montana and who have been working collaboratively for a number of years. And telling the story of why it's so important for these communities to be more collaborative and to take care of our places. And I'd hope to put the links on here, so I'm going to have to do that, Catherine. But in the end, everything I've talked about today, including working with BLM, and by the way, it's really interesting. Right as we speak, within the next couple of weeks, we'll be talking to BLM about actually maybe expanding our permit on public land, which would be sort of unheard of. But the reason they're exploring that is because we have this breadth of data that we've been collecting over a number of years. But in the end, working with BLM, working with NGOs, working with our community, just working with people and leveraging our shared intelligence. That's how these landscapes are going to be managed and protected over time. And that's the goal. Basically, everything we're doing here. It's certainly not about just our ranch. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Bill, plus Peter, who had to step away. But it was great to hear about all of the different methods, bird surveys on the ground using the Rangeland analysis platform. Hopefully people got lots of ideas. I'm just gonna shift right over to the next portion. There are some questions in the chat, so Bill, you can be sort of thinking about what you wanna say when we get to the end. But I'm gonna turn it over to Lawrence. Lawrence has a background in ranching, water resource management, NRCS workings, as well as local government. And I just personally want to thank him for being a key partner on this workshop series. And over to you, Lawrence. But you're muted, so we're going to ask you to unmute first.
Sorry about that. Anyway, I'm not going to take very much time. I'm just going to go ahead and give a little bit of background how we've been able to start a pilot project on the Forest Service lands here in New Mexico, and hopefully it's going to grow over time. It all started basically back in 2020 when we had a conversation with Jessica Crowther, who lives in Wyoming and is a range scientist, and they had worked with a joint cooperative monitoring project on the BLM land over there. And I had been the president of the Tio Grande Livestock Association in northern New Mexico on the Carson National Forest, and we had begun monitoring over there, and it wasn't joint cooperative because we were doing it to try and protect our interests, and we kind of had a little bit of an adversarial relationship with the Forest Service at the time. But anyway, we went and decided that we were going to do our best to get a joint cooperative monitoring in New Mexico started. And so what Jessica gave her expertise, and I started approaching the people that I knew on the National Forest, the range staff at the Tres Piedras Ranger District and the Rita Ranger District. And right away we found out that there was a lot of interest. So we decided to go up the ladder to see how we could get started. So we talked to Nick, who's the main range staff there in on the Carson National Forest, and James Duran, the forester for the Carson, was interested too, but they told us we had to talk to Region 3, and we went up and decided to talk to Kent, and he was real interested because they were doing cooperative monitoring in Arizona, and he was real interested in getting started in New Mexico, but he was really wanted to get one project done, which could he was trying to get the final forests in Arizona started on joint cooperative monitoring, and WLA decided to help him financially to try to get that started, and that was successful. So now we're trying to get it all started in New Mexico, and it was really timely because we also have they were working on putting together survey 1, 2, 3 with the to gather the data, and we were interested in trying to have the permittees involved too, so that it would be a more of a cooperative relationship, and that we felt that way they make better decisions on the land. And so that's what they've done. And at this point, we had hoped to get collecting data at the end of the season, this last season, but there were a few issues with the last version of survey 1, 2, 3 that they were working on. So what's going to happen is we're actually going to start. We were planning to start with 2 allotments, but we're going to actually start with 4 allotments during range readiness this coming spring. And so with that, Kent and Bethany are going to go ahead and demonstrate survey 1, 2, 3 and how user-friendly it is for especially the permittees. And we're hoping to get started real quick, and hopefully in a few years that will be where Bill is, and and a lot of the other people who have been doing this, doing monitoring and helping with their decisions. So with that, I'll go ahead and let Kent. And
Okay, can you hear me okay?
yes.
Okay, and Bill and Peter, great presentation. I was really intrigued with your rangeland monitoring group and the tools you're using there. Sounds like you're really in tune with your management and how it affects the rangelands and your livestock. So good on you. Along those lines, we've been using something similar with the Rocky Mountain Research Station down here in Arizona and New Mexico, using remote sensing, and we can look back to 1984 at production and the change in vegetation, and really looking forward to having that be more available to us, at our desktops. But yeah, good stuff. I have a friend that works for the NRCS up in Utah, and he kind of describes the difference in our monitoring, say, of running a tape versus remote sensing. He says when we run the tape, it's like having a Cheerio on our carpet, and we're trying to describe our house by looking through that Cheerio instead of giving a tour of the house. And sometimes remote sensing can help us look at the whole operation versus looking through that Cheerio. But today I'm going to talk about Cheerios a bit, I guess. And we appreciate Western Landowners Alliance and Quivira for inviting us to be part of your webinar today. And so today we're going to share some things about some tools that we're developing and using to collect and to store the data, as well as retrieve it, query it, share it, use it to make decisions to be more effective in our land stewardship. I saw in the chat, Rachel put up a question about if a contact with Delta Spain using VGS. We'll put in a plug for that in 3 weeks on this webinar series on March 17th. We'll be giving a short presentation with Chaz Perry, who works for Delta Spain, and talking about VGS. And we use that platform a lot for our long-term monitoring. And today I'm going to be sharing a platform that we are developing to help us with our short-term monitoring. And as Lawrence mentioned, we do have, when we talk about multiple stakeholders and working together to collect our monitoring data, we do have agreements for all 6 forests in Arizona with the University of Arizona to help us collect that long-term monitoring data. And we appreciate WLA's support in helping us look at that for the 5 forests in New Mexico, as well as the 2 grasslands in Texas and Oklahoma. And we look forward to working with the Quivira and New Mexico State and others to get that moving forward. Okay, but for today, let me share my screen here a little bit. I got some hokey little slides to kind of go through. I'm going to talk about kind of where we've been and the old school way of doing things. And then I'm going to turn it over to Betheny Crenshaw, who also works for the Forest Service. And she can explain a bit more of kind of where we're headed, getting out of the old school so much and getting a little more with the program. So can you see the screen okay of that slide?
Not yet. I can't see your
Not
screen yet.
sharing.
Oh, I gotta hit that little share button. Okay. Operator error. It had the screen, but it had the little button. Okay, what about now?
Looks great.
That's great.
Looks a little better. All right. Yeah, so monitoring. Who'd want to do a crazy thing like that? Well, we've been doing it for a long time, and I've been with Outfit for 30 years, and it's important to invite the permittees or the producer to collect that data with us. And that's been going my whole career and for decades before I ever came along. And I got looking around, I dug out some old photos. You might laugh at them. These are back when 1.3 megapixel was the coolest thing ever on our digital cameras. And so if they look a little grainy, it's because they are. There's a photo of guess which one's the Forest Service. That's the guy on the right, permittee there on the left. doing some production data collection. Another Forest Service permittee back in the day. This one I think is kind of funny. So here's the permittee in the middle, and the Forest Service guy, he's got his hands out. It's almost, you can see the dialogue. Hey, that's vegetation, not bare ground. And he's like, what? And the true value of, monitoring together, a lot of times it's the data we collect, but more and more so it's the being on the ground, looking at it together. This is what I'm seeing. What are you seeing? And having those discussions and coming up to solutions together. To me, that's the real value of our monitoring together. This was an interesting one. Does my pointer show up on the screen?
Yes.
Okay. So these two guys in the middle, they speak very little English, but they're very good at Spanish. And we speak very little broken Spanish, but we're okay at English. Fortunately, this guy on the right is fluent in both English and Spanish. And so he helped us this particular day do some training on production. And when you get into doing monitoring, you just never know who's going to come out of the woodwork to help you. You don't know which direction it's going to go, but it's going to be fun and it's going to be successful in the end. So this is quite a crowd we had this day doing stream surveys. But it's important to do monitoring together, particularly, we talk about adaptive management. We need to adapt and respond to things that are coming our way. You never know what's going to hit you. If you got some monitoring data to help you out and you kind of plan for things, even when things come at you, maybe you can turn it into something a little productive and useful. So today, again, I'm going to focus more on the short-term monitoring or things we kind of collect on an annual basis. And then again, on March 17th, we'll talk more about long-term monitoring. And these are some things we're working on here in the Southwest region, which is Arizona and New Mexico, but actually they're going on throughout the Forest Service, whether it's Utah, Montana, Colorado, California, back east, these things are going on. So here's a list of some typical things we collect on an annual basis. Of are we ready to graze a certain area and what time should we be there and with how many and how long? Looking at the timing, intensity, duration, and season of use. And are we ready to receive? Are improvements in place? And of course, with any monitoring is photos. And to be successful, it's good to have the right tools and the right training. And we've committed to our producers we will go out as often as we need to until both you and we are comfortable in the data that's being collected and it's done correctly and well. So back in the day, in 2003, that's when we punched that on a little calculator. This was the latest and greatest. And it's kind of funny to look back now to think this was the latest and greatest. Look at that camera. It's a disposable film camera. I don't know if you can even get those anymore. And paper and pencil that we used to buy these, put these kits together with a little leather bag, and we would give these to the permittees and do training on how to collect the data. And we would collect it and they would collect it. And some say, well, you got the fox guarding the hen house. And you're darn right we do. But we don't just, of course, turn people loose. We monitor and make sure things are done correctly. And if for some reason people's data is way different, well, then let's get back together and figure out why it's so different. We find in general that the data is usually pretty close. So this is how we've been doing, kind of the old school. And when you collect the data, you collect it, you print it off, you file it in that file cabinet, and you wonder if it'll ever see the light of day ever again. And if you ever do need to use that data again for something, then good luck in trying to find it and going through all of your files to pull it back up. All right, now I'm having a hard time with Zoom here oh, here we go. Hit new, stop video, new share. How do I, there we go, stop share. Turn off that screen. So that's kind of how we've done things, and it goes in the file cabinet and the producers, they don't know what's in the permit file. Is it good stuff, bad stuff, indifferent, who knows? And so there's a better way, there's gotta be a better way to both collect it, to store it, retrieve it, query it, share it, use it. And so one platform that we are looking at and developing is Survey 123 is one of the platforms. And so Bethany, I'll turn over to you to kind of highlight some of the benefits of using that platform to collect the data. It's the same data. It's still kind of old school in that way, but maybe it's a newer way of going about collecting it, storing it, and sharing it. So Bethany, go ahead.
Hey, everyone. I'm excited to show you some of the things that we've been collecting here. Okay, so in the interest of technological displays, sometimes my computer stops running. And so what I'm going to do is I made a quick video just right before this thing to show you what's happening so it doesn't crash on me. So, Kent mentioned that one of the areas we've been working in is the Southwest, and started out testing these new applications. And here's some of the data that was collected last summer. And the mapping system you're seeing here is called ArcGIS Online, and the company Esri created it. It's one of the main systems the Forest Service uses. And we can use this online platform to look at the data that was collected on our phones and tablets. And so here's some of the points that were collected. I'm going to zoom into northwestern New Mexico in the Cibola National Forest. And let's take a deeper look at one of the points here. And this was collected last October. And the data collected here, they were looking at stubble height, so utilization of the grazed area. And when they were out there, they walked a transect, and then they had recorded all of the different grass heights. They also took some photographs while they were out there as well. So we've got the location where this was done, as well as information that was collected about it. What we can do with this data is make maps, as well as generate reports. So for this particular form that was filled out, a report can be generated that shows the data collected. So what were those heights along the transect, and what was the average? Also a map of where this took place, the general view of the allotments, as well as the pasture boundaries are part of that map. A little bit zoomed in as well. And then all of the photographs that were taken to represent what was out there at the time. And this is just one of the data sets that is collected. We also collect not only the utilization, but also the productivity, those types of monitoring data, as well as some of the improvements, so fences and water systems and that type of a thing. And Kent, would you like me to share the form, or is that something you'd like to see at this point?
I think we're getting down to like 6 minutes left.
Okay, good deal. We get the data pretty easily through some forms on phones and tablets, and that's all I have. Back to you, Kent.
Maybe to say on that is it's been a good platform to use to collect the data, whether it's for the uplands, our implementation. We've developed some forms for riparian assessments, pebble counts, so forth. Another nice thing about it is, back in the day, after about 3 days of collecting data in the field, you'd spend a whole day in the office to summarize your data, download your photos, resize the photos, bring your photos in. Also, your text went somewhere to some other page. You gotta go find it again, bring it back to the right place. Go to DNR Garmin to bring your long, and you're just, you left before dark in the morning. You got back to the office after dark at night, so you put it on your desk. And after the whole season, that just piles up. And someday I'll get to that. A neat feature about this is when you get back, you can hit send, you get that spinning circle, which I hate. It takes about 20 seconds and it's sent to the cloud and it's back into AGOL, ArcGIS Online. You can bring it up then on your web screen there, and literally you click 3 times, and you can say whether you want it in a PDF or Word format. If you want to bring it up in Word, you can then go in and type and make changes if you want to. If it's all good to begin with, it's literally 5 clicks, and that report's coming off the printer. The photos are in there, the map's on there, the text is where it's done. You can pull it off the printer and file it as well as save it. You can also now share it electronically. People can view it on their websites. And the next step on this is to grant guest accounts to volunteers, permittees, and producers. So they can have their phone or their tablet in their hand. They can collect that data, be partners with us in collecting that and sharing it, storing it, retrieving it along with us. It's not so much, we're cow cops anymore, but we're partners in this venture of managing for good rangelands and being good stewards of the land. So, and it's not the cure all, of course. It's just another tool in the toolbox. It looks like so far has a lot of promise to be a good and valuable tool. And we're using it, developing it and starting to use it now for our short-term annual monitoring, as well as using VGS that we'll present here in a few weeks for our long-term monitoring. So anyways, those are some things we're working on in the Forest Service, and particularly here in the Southwest. And thanks for the invite today to share that with you, some things we got going on.
And can I just say one thing, is that when you're collecting the data, you're collecting what's going right as well as not just what's going wrong, and which is really, really an important thing, especially to making your decisions on the land.
That was great. Thank you, Bethany, Kent, and Lawrence. Excellent partners in government agencies and nonprofits. I love the idea of 5 clicks and getting a report. That seems like a magical unicorn. And then, yeah, thank you, Lawrence, for that point that you're monitoring to see what's going well, not just what's going not well. Well, we've got about 3 minutes. I didn't see a ton of questions in the chat yet. I think there was mention of VGS, which we're going to talk about in a couple of weeks. So if there's specific questions, maybe unmute and ask them, but otherwise stay tuned on finding out who's using VGS. And then let's see, for Kent, why isn't US Forest Service using AIM? And feel free to unmute if we need more clarification, but I think that's over to Bethany or Kent, yeah.
We have RAIM. What is AIM? Probably the same thing.
Yeah, Marcel, is AIM is the BLM monitoring, is that right? Feel free to unmute yourself.
I'm trying to unmute. Yeah, assessment, inventory, and monitoring. And it's a product basically developed with DOI and the Hornado. That's basically being used nationwide on BLM lands and quite a few other lands. I'm just so out of touch with I'm in Wyoming, out in the desert, not a lot of trees around. So other time I work with the Forest Service is on fire. So I just can't remember hearing why the Forest Service isn't going towards AIM.
There has been quite a bit of discussion, I know, between the Forest Service and the BLM with that. And BLM has done a great job of developing this program, and they give a great amount of training there at their Phoenix Training Center. The BLM was actually one of the main organizations to help get VGS up and running. And then they've gone to AIM and kind of dropped VGS. The Forest Service, we're still using VGS a lot in our long-term monitoring as well as other protocols. So it's a good program, and the BLM's done a great job of developing it.
Well, and I'm going to recognize that we're at time, so if folks have to jump off, thank you for being here. Like we said, we'll have this recording available. I'm happy to stick around for a couple of more minutes, and if any speakers and folks are able to stick around for a few more minutes, we can take a couple more questions. But I just wanted to say thank you, everyone, for being here. If you got to jump, and maybe this is a question over for Leah. I think this just points at how important it is to have, even if you have two different data sets, of how you can think about interoperability. Leah, I was just wondering if you have any thoughts to weigh in on of how, big data sets, how we can make them interact with each other in the future.
Yeah, that is something we definitely struggle with and have had many conversations about in our field methods working group specifically. So I don't really have a great answer there, to be honest with you. I mean, it's been really challenging for us. And we realize, especially as we try to aggregate data across large regional projects that have already started to do research, it's hard to align those at the end. So some things that we've looked at is trying to aggregate just based on soil type. And then if we're able to sort of break down soil samples on an inch by inch basis instead of doing increments from like 0 to 10 and 10 to 20, which sometimes conflicts with East Coast, which usually does 0 to 15 and 15 to 30 centimeters. So we've considered things like that, but it is a huge challenge.
I mean, I feel like part of these webinars are not just similar to what Lauren said, not just what's going well, but like really understanding what we're all facing. So both sides of every coin of what's really promising and then what is really challenging, so that more of us are aware of it. Let's see. Let's see. Thanks, Catherine, for sharing Bill's ranch website. Feel free to unmute if you have a question, or if any of the early presenters had anything else to say, given now that they've heard the whole thing.
Hey,
go ahead.
let's start. This is actually for you, Bill. I was just wondering if you could talk a bit more about specifically about the process, the data, the collaboration, and moving towards the conversations with BLM.
Well, I guess at this point it wouldn't be moving toward, as we've been kind of working with that conversation since the 80s. I think the important point to draw from that whole experience and ongoing experience with BLM is that we established a really good foundation of trust when we all agreed that we wanted to do something quite different, and that we didn't rush in, or I didn't say, gee, this is really a cool way to do it, and you guys should just let me do it. We really had to take some time to come up with a plan and then have some sideboards so that we wouldn't do something really bad that BLM would feel bad about or we would feel bad about. So that conversation that we all experience, in effective collaboration, is that, you build a culture of how you talk about unmet needs and what people want, and you just build that culture over time, and then all of a sudden you find that people let you do things that they would never let you do because they trust you. We've also, with BLM, they've wanted to do research projects, and because we have this relationship, we've been very open for them doing research projects on the ranch. And so it's a two-way street. We're trying to make them be good at what they do, and they're helping us be good at what we do.
How long did it take you to build that trust, Bill?
Oh, took some time, but I mean, there's never, if you're aware of my character, I'm kind of a collaborative activist. So, I'm pretty committed to creating safe spaces for people to talk about difficult stuff. And I think that the guy, David James, who was the first field guy from BLM, yeah, he just, I think we just had a conversation and everybody shared what they needed to share. And it's like, yeah, let's give this a try and let's all do this with our eyes open. And so it's, we've had different field people over the years that have kind of like, what the hell are you guys doing? This isn't even, you guys are doing stuff that aren't even the rules and regs. It's basically outcome-based grazing under the radar. And now outcome-based grazing is becoming really important and people are trying to do it more. And so, yeah, it's just an ongoing thing. That's all. I mean, you just never want to take that relationship for granted.
Great, and thanks, Bree. For some context, can you share what is the average or range of rainfall, length of growing season, or other ecological factors?
Oh, is that for me?
I think that's
Yes.
for you, Bill.
Yes.
Well, yeah, we can be everywhere from 6 to 7 to 20, but on average, we're about 10 to 12. And so it's quite varied out here, and how it comes and when it comes. In our part of the world, versus the Great Basin, or like you guys down the Southwest with your monsoon season, we get most of our moisture in April, May, and June, and that sort of aligns with the longest growing days in the year. And that's why the Northern Plains are the Northern Plains and why the Southwest is the Southwest. The Great Basin is the Great Basin. You guys get moisture at different times. And so we could probably take more advantage of moisture because of the time of year, but it can vary a lot. And building a landscape that can capture moisture, which is at the, at the core, I think at the core of where we're going with the Rangeland Monitoring Group is just a deeper appreciation of the microbiome and how it collaborates in supporting plants. And so I think we're trying to get a lot more smart about, how do we make sure that foundation is working, because it feeds the rest, it feeds everything else, including what we eat. Let's see. Yeah, the growing season. Yeah, we'll start growing grass sometime in April, even though it could get cold, and we might go, into October. It's getting a little bit longer. Guess what? Climate change. So, again, all the stuff we're doing here is trying to create more resilience around more variability and change. And who knows where that's all going.
Thank you.
What about the social aspects of monitoring for any of you? It was directed at Bill, but I think anyone can talk about the social aspects.
I'll probably give people some space since I've been talking. But when you're done, I can address that.
I'll touch on it a bit. As I said when I was talking, that often being on the ground together is more valuable than the data that you collect or the results of the data. It helps you not be across the table from each other, but you're standing side by side. You can make those decisions on the best way to do things, and you're looking at the what, and you're focused on that. It requires trust. We have to trust we're both there to do the right thing. We both have the right thing in mind, right? It just builds that whole social and trust network and working together. It's a required element.
Hey, can I ask a follow-up to that, and maybe for both you and Bill, kind of coming from different directions on this, but as I guess, like, cultural shifts are happening, and so as we see more and more folks, young folks coming into BLM, Forest Service, NRCS that don't have a connection to ag production or to the land in a lot of ways that, you know, the, I guess, older generation of staff had. What does that look like in the trust building aspect of it? And I know Bill's involved with like the Kavira NAP program and does mentoring. And so I'm curious from both of your perspectives, what shifts are you seeing and how do we continue to work to build that trust with, again, folks coming in with different backgrounds?
So I think this is awesome, bringing these young people out here, and actually the fact that they don't know a hell of a lot is actually to their credit in terms of being sort of malleable and open. I mean, if they're passionate and have a good work ethic, you could do anything. And usually these apprentices are that. So actually, you know, in reality, like our apprentice Natalie Berkman, I mean, she brought a lot of capacity to our business and to our life. So it was a great addition. And then she, you know, got involved in some of the community projects we're working on. And now trying to me, the challenge is we get these young people out here, and you know, we work with the AmeriCorps on some projects too, and we got this watershed corps. A lot of these kids end up getting jobs, being part of the community, or end up working on places full time. And so this energy from young people, and then to try and create enterprises so that they can stay here is a real big challenge. But it's the energy that these rural areas can really benefit from. And, you know, and on the grazing aspect, I mean, I'm kind of becoming more of an advocate that we should, it's kind of like going back to the future is like herding. I mean, to do the kind of stuff we're doing involves a lot of feet on the ground and being with the animals all the time. And the kind of things we are accomplishing are really helpful with the apprentices, because it's just, when you're moving that often, if it's just one person, they'll get burnt out. But, you know, having another person or two people doing that, like there's a great ranch in Idaho, the Alder Spring Ranch, that has a lot of interns comes, and they run on a big public permit in the mountains, and they got a pile of interns. They're moving like 500 cattle, you know, 500 animals every day in the really rough landscapes, and the results are great. But they could not accomplish that without people, you know. And I think a lot of ranchers are a little bit reluctant to do some of the things we do because they think, I don't have the time or energy to do that level of engagement. Well, these apprentices are like the key to it's maybe the key to bringing herding back to the West, and the results that I think will arise from that.
Nowadays, sometimes if you know, kids coming in, and there's just not as many that come from a ranching background as much. And that's just to change the times. And so you get that raised eyebrow, like, what are you doing here? What do you know? But I think it's more the attitude that they bring. Doesn't matter where you come from. If you got a good attitude, you can work with people, you'll be all right. If you got a bad attitude, doesn't matter where you came from, you're going to be hard to work with, whether you came from a ranching background or from the city. One time we were up in Salt Lake, west of Salt Lake, out there on the flats, and the BLM was giving us a demonstration, and the guy that was the range con was a recreation guy. He had no range experience at all. But to this day, he's probably one of the best range cons I've ever met. Part is because he admitted right up front, hey, I know recreation, I don't know anything about range. But he recognized where he had some weaknesses, and so then he relied more on the permittee. You guys have been out here for generations. What are you seeing? What do you recommend? What do you suggest? And then he was willing to work with them. And so they showed us some issues they'd had in the past and how they addressed it. And the solutions they came up with were kind of outside the box thinking. It is out there a ways, but it worked. And one reason it worked is because this guy was willing to try something new and recognize his limitations. No background at all on range, but a great range con. So as long as they got a good attitude and we can work together, you can get past a lot of that stuff.
I'd like to, I didn't really get at the social aspects, and I think this may be the most important part of this work. I work with some sort of landscape, some rancher groups up here. One is the Winnet Aces, which you could Google, or Ranch Stewardship Alliance. And so these are sort of self-organizing, self-governing groups that have just come together to respond to the challenges that they find themselves facing in terms of the health of their rural communities and making their businesses work. And so, like, monitoring, this monitoring thing is how does the group working with all these various partners? So what makes these groups unique is that they're working with a lot of non-traditional partners who really want to support them, because these ranchers and the community are willing to try and do different things and be able to make the case of what they're getting done on the ground. And so for these things to actually happen, we actually need the support. Western Landowner Alliance, Quivira, I mean, these groups, we ranchers need their support to, provide resources. NAP is just one that can actually put resources on the ground. Now, I'll give you an example, how these partnerships work. So we do work with, the Sustainable Ranching Program with World Wildlife Fund, and recently got certified with Audubon's Bird Friendly Program. And we work with TNC and U.S. Fish and Wildlife on candidate conservation with Assurances Program. We get resources, when we work with these people to do these things, because we're meeting their objectives of protecting wildlife. And so we're kind of redoing our pipeline, and last year it was about, the first phase was about $100,000, big capital investment, but 75% of those dollars came from some of these other funds. We had 5 different partners that help invested in that. And why would they invest in that? Because they can look at our monitoring, they can look at our relationship, they can look at our efforts to try and advance their work as well as our own. And they're putting dollars into places that really advance sort of everybody out here. So, so what's more social than that? And besides, it's really a lot of fun working with these folks. I mean, I think what I enjoy most about these working groups out here, and I know a lot of you who work like with Quivira and Western Landowner Alliance groups, is that these groups are really wanting to get stuff done, and they're really experimental and adaptive. And agriculture as a whole tends to be a little bit reactive versus responsive. And these groups are just looking at every opportunity that might come down the road that could advance the well-being of the whole circle. And so I find that people often joke in these watershed groups, geez, you come to these, everybody's laughing, even though you're dealing with people who are quite different and have been kind of fighting each other. But there's a culture there of like, we're trying to get some stuff done, and it's people feel good about it. It's good for their well-being and health.